The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. I see you as you hear me. So this is another special episode 116. The author interview on the baby doll serial killer book. I am delighted to bring you B.R. Bates and Gerry Cliff, Ph.D. Today we get to hear from the journalist and law enforcement, so this is a twofer. The baby doll serial killer, the John Eric Armstrong Homicides book, just hit the murder shelves, published in late October 2024. And it is out to rave reviews, including mine. And you can get it on Amazon or anywhere you buy your books, actually. I do have a link on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, February 2025. Now, a little bit about our author, B.R. Bates. She is a longtime journalist and author of 10 books on other genres and other publications as well, which is very impressive. B.R. Bates graduated from Michigan State University, accredited School of Journalism, with her bachelor's. She spent 10 years in the daily newspaper industry before transitioning to the corporate world. She spent 5 years at the Detroit News, where she worked at the time of the Armstrong case, so she was immersed in it. A Michigan native, Bates has also lived in Atlanta and Washington, D.C. Now, co-author Gerry Cliff, he was the commanding officer of the violent crime section that investigated the Armstrong case in Detroit. So he was right there when it all began to unfold from day one. He has degrees in criminal justice from Michigan State University and the University of Detroit, with advanced degrees in public administration and urban politics from Wayne State University. So, let's get ready. I am delighted to welcome B.R. Bates and Gerry Cliff to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let me echo that. This is really exciting for us.
Yeah, I love bringing the best true crime books to my murder bookies. We call them murder bookies. I know it's a little corny, but it's me and it's us. It's my little niche in the true crime world. So I've read 1 million books on serial killers.
Yep.
I had never heard of this serial killer before. So thank you for writing this book.
Right. Yeah, I do hear that quite a bit. He is a little bit more of an obscure serial killer as serial killers go. He's not a Dahmer or a Bundy or a Richard Ramirez, etc.
Right. So you were working at the Detroit News at the time. And Gerry, you were the commander, right? Was it the task force?
Charge of the violent crime section. I had just been promoted like 2 months before this thing came across our desk. And it was my first big case. And needless to say, being the new boss, I was kind of tense when I read the circumstances. So,
yeah, I can imagine that might stop your heart. You say, a body was found. Oh, that's sad. Okay, let's see what happened. Oh, never mind. It was two bodies. Never mind. 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how did you two start collaborating on the book?
We have a mutual friend, one of Jerry's compatriots on Detroit police force, who I think is also at least semi-retired from DPD. Our mutual friend introduced us because I have had an interest in true crime for a few years now. I didn't all my life, but in more recent years, like the last probably 10 years, the past 10 years, I have loved the Dateline NBC and the Forensic Files and all those shows. I've been eating those up and I love true crime. And so he knew about my interest in true crime, but he also knew that his friend Gerry had covered a case, had worked a case in Detroit. back in 1999 and 2000 that involved a serial killer. And Gerry always felt that that case would make a good book. And he told me about it. And I'm like, that sounds interesting. And I mulled it over for a little while. And our friend Greg introduced us and we talked more. And thus the project was born. I don't know, Gerry, if you want to add anything, I don't mean to talk you out of it.
Not a problem. You do a much better job at this than I ever did, Billy. When I first got it, I mean, as you can imagine, just being promoted into a unit like the Violent Crime Section leadership position, and all of a sudden realizing that the gravity of what I was faced with as far as a work environment and job responsibilities, when this case evolved and it ended up in my hands, or in our hands, I should say, because, without the people of that incredible unit, nothing would have been done. But it really struck me at the time. This is something that's going to be very, very important. It was my first big one in my entire career of this nature. And so as things progressed, it occurred to me, maybe I ought to make my own copy of the file. And so I did. And I kept it with me, thinking that someday I'd write a book about it. And what was it, 21 years later, we were introduced, and Billy Ray had already been an established author in a different field. And having been a news reporter, I knew that she knew research. So it seemed like the perfect match. So we got together, and fortunately for me, she made my goal achievable. I had written a book prior to this in a job that I had just left, but it was a textbook. It wasn't this type of a book. It was something totally different. Without Billy Ray, this never would happen. I know me.
So, how did you get the cooperation of everybody? Because you have the whole task force, the family members, the victims' families, the victims that lived. You got everybody, from what I can see, talking and contributing.
Yeah, it was a challenge. That probably the biggest challenge of the research was contacting family members of the victims. That was the biggest challenge. And what I learned, this is my first true crime project. Most of my writing career, I've written in a totally different genre, the pop culture genre. So this true crime project returned me more solidly to my journalism roots, because I had been writing, but just not in this particular hard news genre. And so I found that the biggest challenge was getting to the different family members of the victims. And what I learned is that Facebook, for one thing, Facebook was like my number one method of finding people. And in ways that you would not imagine. For instance, friends lists, finding relations, looking for a certain last name, looking for even first names. And then there's a couple online databases that provide a lot of information, unfortunately, because I'm really into privacy too. And there's a part of me that really does not like that. But there are ways to find people online. But then once you find them, what I learned is that with a victim family member, to be as gentle as possible, to send the initial message, maybe through Facebook, and they're not on your friends list, so they may or may not see it. They may see it months later, or they may see it right away, depending on if they ever check messages from non-friends. But to send a gentle email that will just let them know the intent, let them know your goals and the fact that you want to honor their family member, and you want to provide an opportunity for input, and you want to meet that person. I really wanted to meet these girls. I honestly did. I wanted to learn who they were as people, as human beings who deserve to live. And so I found that you send a message, either Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever, and then you have to let it percolate for a while, because even if they see it right away, they're not necessarily going to respond. It may be 3 months later. It may be a year later that you actually hear from them. So that was a process that I had to learn. And then as far as the other folks, tracking down people who knew Armstrong from North Carolina, where he was born and raised, and even here from Michigan, people who worked with him, and friends and associates, and then law enforcement. Of course, Gerry was very, very valuable and helpful for tracking down some of the officers who worked the case. That was a big help. And then just finding other people the same way, finding them online, sending messages. I did send or make a lot of contacts with people that I did not hear back from. Of course, there are a few people who have passed away since the case happened. It has been almost 25 years now. But there were others who, I just didn't hear back from. And that's fine. I respect their decision. Even Armstrong's own family members. I had contacted a couple people who did then message me back, hey, I got your message, but I just really don't want to talk. So I totally understand that. You take what you have and you go with it and you try to provide as complete a picture as possible. And I always saw it as the more people you talk to, even if you only receive a sentence or two back from them that is actually helpful and insightful, that makes the project all that much more valuable.
Yeah.
It was a really enjoyable process, and it was definitely a learning process for me as well.
You have to have the patience of Job. Mm-hmm. There's just no question about it. I wanted to do this interview with you and do the book on the podcast because of the intensive research. I can't think of a thing you missed. Having looked into a lot of this. Briefly, I'll tell you, I did something similar. I did a book on Gary Ridgway and the 49 victims. And you do this beautifully in your book. But I had to figure out how to talk about 49 victims.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And I was determined, if it was a sentence, whatever it was going to be, I was determined to say something and to honor and respect the 49 victims. The digging that you have to do, the Facebook messages that go out to try to reach people. And I did something similar. And think about it. I mean, my podcasts run about an hour, 49 victims. Even if I said 1 minute about each one, right there's a whole 49 minutes.
Yeah. So
I also had to figure out how to put their stories into the book story that I was weaving effectively. And it is no easy task. I have such great respect for you for doing that.
Thank you.
The research is astounding. And the number of voices that you address is amazing. It's just truly amazing. I was saying I have to read like the last third of the book over again just because it was so important and powerful. Mm. I mean, I'm going to read it again anyway, but just truly, guys, buy the book. Buy the book. Just buy the book. Yeah. Beyond just reaching out to people, how were you able to process John Eric Armstrong, dealing with him?
Yep, I did contact him in prison, sent an initial email that he did not respond to, sent another email. Just explaining what I was doing, being very upfront. Hey, I'm doing a book and I would love to talk to you. That was the summation of my contact with him. And he did respond that he was willing to talk to me, but he didn't want to talk about the case. He was not interested in giving his perspective for the book. He didn't feel like, he said something to the effect of he didn't want to put his family through that again. He didn't think the victims' families, should be put through that again, etc. So he was willing to chat with me, and we did email back a little bit, back and forth, and then I went to visit him in prison. And he is completely different than anything that you would imagine. He seems quite different than the Armstrong, I guess, I got to know in the research and the people that I talked to and the police records and his background and all of that. Nowadays, of course, he's been incarcerated for more than 20 years. But you do wonder what goes through his head, especially someone who does not speak about the case. And to the best of my knowledge, he doesn't talk about the case to anybody. There is this whole thing, I guess they call it murderabilia, where you can get online and you can buy a letter from a serial killer to someone. People write to serial killers and back when we actually wrote paper letters, of course, now it's emails. But there are paper letters that people have received or corresponded with serial killers that they then sell on eBay or on some of these sites. And so you can go buy a piece of history, I guess some people consider it, for something like that. And a couple of Armstrong's past letters have even popped up on some of those sites. And I purchased one myself just because I wanted to get a look at it and compare it to emails that I've had from him. And he was talking to females, corresponding to females from prison, and still does not even acknowledge the case or talk about the case. And you look at other serial killers, like Jeffrey Dahmer comes to mind, who was very open about his crimes, took responsibility for his crimes. I have to give him credit for that. Because in interviews, I'm thinking of one particular interview he did with Nancy Glass in the 1990s, right before he was killed in prison, where he's just very honest. He says, I'm not going to excuse it to a bad childhood. I'm not going to say I had bad parents. The person who's responsible for these crimes is looking at you right now, and I was just astounded that he was so honest about that. And there have been other killers who have been honest about their crimes, but Armstrong.
Ed Kemper comes to mind.
Okay. Ed Kemper. Yes. But Armstrong is not like that. He does not want to talk about it. I think I would have to say from the small amount that I know him, I would have to say he struggles with it and he does not understand it really to this day. And it is confusing and conflicting based on my own opinions of exactly what went on in his life and in the crimes. So yeah, it's hard to reconcile all of that. He is a man of contradictions. He seems like the boy next door. He seems honest and innocent. And he did strike at least two people that I interviewed that way as the boy next door. They used that terminology. But yet you talk to his survivors and he turned real dark real fast, flew into a rage and became someone totally different. So how do you even reconcile that? It's almost like you have to wonder about a split personality type of thing with some of these killers.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I did notice reading in the book that someone was saying he just seemed possessed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that struck me as I've heard that before. Their eyes went black. Something came over there. You hear that description from survivors. Sometimes, Gerry, police officers will say that they get to that tipping point in the interview and all of a sudden the killer emerged and you just got that glimpse.
That was kind of the case in this situation when you look at the description of the interview process that he was subjected to by our investigators. He just all of a sudden gave it up,
And you guys were absolutely magnificent in the way that you Mirandized him, talking about victim number one, Mirandized him again, talking about victim number two. And I think it was very important given the way the defense, at least in the first trial anyway, conducted themselves and really trying to find a crack, a wedge, something in there to work for his defense, that's the way the process works. It's an adversarial process. So we need our defense attorneys to hold our prosecutors accountable. But, you're holding your breath saying, oh, God, don't find something. Don't hit a mark there. And you guys really worked to make sure that, at least in that sense of it, it was not going to happen. You were not going to lose this confession.
Well, the whole concept behind the violent crime section when it was first created about 10 years prior to this case is that we were given the ability to select the best of the best from all over our department. We merged with detectives from the Michigan State Police. We had detectives from the Wayne County Sheriff's Department. We had State Attorney General's investigator working with us. We had FBI agents. We had an IRS agent. We had an organization that was designed to be a borderless law enforcement organization to the greatest extent possible. And consequently, we had access to some of the best training available in the country and took advantage of it to the greatest extent possible. The VCTF became the chief's go-to unit when homicide encountered something that they might be overwhelmed with, or sex crimes ran into a problem with a serial rapist, or even armed robbery. We worked with them on a serial, I guess you could call it, bank robbery ring that was operating in the city not too long after this. And in every case, that combination that was used with the task force together gave us so many tools. And the fact that, like I said, in a department of over 5,000 police officers, we were able to pick the best of the best detectives that were available to us and make them better by merging them with these bigger, more broad-based, more well-financed groups like the FBI and get them that kind of training as well. It was a formula for success that I hope they're still replicating today, but I'm not sure. I've been out of the department now for going on 20 years in February, and I know it's a lot smaller thanks to the defund the police initiatives that we've seen, but, be that as it may, it is what it is. So.
Yeah. I've read other books where the jurisdictional borders let a serial killer run amok because there was not communication between different police departments. And then, some of them were holding on. This is mine. I can't share this information with you. And it just absolutely defied logic for me, because it seems like when you have those boundaries between jurisdictions, it's like a speed bump when you're trying to catch criminals. It's just this speed bump in the parking lot of investigation, if that makes any sense. But I think you guys did such a fabulous job in coordinating, because, a lot of people think the investigation stops at the arrest. It sounds very much like this almost began at the arrest.
Exactly. We had the guy, there's a part in the book I talk about the way we discovered the body dump was our first point at which we realized we had a serial killer was when we discovered the body dump. And I talk about that in the meeting with the commander of major crimes. And the thing was that the nature of this unit was such that it was so effective and so incredible in terms of the quality of investigators that were assigned to it, that we had this guy in handcuffs within 41 hours of finding the bodies.
Yes.
Being new to the unit, even though I was in charge of it, it even amazed me. And that's part of the reason I saved the file, was because these guys, they amazed me from the first day I took over until the last day when I moved on to a bigger unit.
Yeah, it was impressive work. I know that once you've found the body dump, now you have to investigate and figure out who these people are and identify them, because how can you investigate a murder if you don't even know who the victim is? Did they use any geographic profiling once they started identifying? Was that a thing?
As I understand geographic profiling, I hope I'm using it in the same manner that you're intending the question. Crime mapping, we really didn't have enough time to use it. I mean, like I said, it took us 41 hours to find this guy. We found the body dump. We know that criminals sort of always tend to operate in the area they're most familiar with, so we knew where his hunting grounds were, let's say. Once we knew what to look for, and the FBI profiling unit gave us the biggest clue to that, we called them right from the scene. We called Quantico, Virginia to talk directly to the FBI profilers and ask their advice from the very beginning. I mean, the evidence techs were still processing the scene when we're on the phone to Washington, D.C., and that was because we had the access through the FBI agents that were already assigned to our team. So my boss picks up a phone, well, it was his cell phone, calls from the site of the body dump, and they said that the best thing that they could recommend is that don't concentrate so much on his successes, concentrate on his failures, because as many successes as he's had, in other words, as many women as he has successfully victimized, there are likely to be several out there that he failed at and that are alive. And due to the nature of the crime and the nature of his victims, we could reasonably assume that they'd still be in that same general location. So that's what we did. We went out and we started talking to people. And like I said, this is a big unit because it's a big department. And when we realized we had a serial killer, it got even bigger because the commander major crime said, I want all three sections working on this. Everybody that doesn't have an ongoing crime scene, I want them on the street looking for this guy. We got to get him off the street as quickly as possible. We already had 3 and who knew how many more we were going to get in whatever time it took for us to catch him. And so we went out, we hit the streets with probably anywhere from 75 to 100 investigators within hours. And within hours, we had located a transgender that had been out as a prostitute that Armstrong had victimized and that had managed to get away. And we also had a female. Well, we stumbled onto a female by accident, actually, during the arrest, that as she's walking by and we're getting him out of the car, she's going, "That's him. That's the guy that attacked me a couple nights ago."
Oh, good.
As it turned out, I don't know if you'd call it luck or just good police work or a combination of both is probably a more accurate way of putting it. We had a really good description of not only John, but we had a description of his vehicle, a blue Jeep. We knew that he was known to wear some sort of a work shirt with a name on it, and we had that name. He went by Eric. We knew about tattoos that were visible. We had a lot of information within a very, very short period of time simply by following that one little tip from the profile. And it worked great. And it was all of that coming together at one point, at one time, that allowed us to solve this thing within 41 hours and get him in custody off the street. Then the background investigation had to be done in order to put together a case for presentation in court.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the challenge then. It's one thing to know someone's guilty. Now you have to be able to prove that someone's guilty.
Right.
And have the pieces of evidence to back up everything. I was cheering you on. It's wonderful when you're reading a book and you're, yeah, been a book I read recently and I was so frustrated and angry. I was throwing it across the room and my husband said, "Honey, you have to stop reading now. You're going to hurt yourself." I was on the edge of my seat a few times, but I did not throw the book across the room in frustration. That's for sure. What a story. BR, you made a little bit of reference to this, and I don't obviously want you to say anything that you really can't say, but is there anything that kind of was on the cutting room floor that you wanted to put in the book, but it was just getting too long?
You start out a project like this worried that you're not going to have enough content, that you're not going to be able to talk to enough people. And so you go for broke and you try to contact everybody you can find, every name associated with the case. I mean, I literally was doing searches online for any cop who was mentioned in any of the police records and any victim family member I could possibly track down. And then as the research rolls on, a year or two later, you realize, I got quite a mountain of stuff here, so I don't know if I can even include everything. And there were, for instance, a lot of photos that we couldn't include in the book. And thankfully, Wild Blue Press, I love them. They just created a photo gallery on their website. So if you go to the Wild Blue Press website and search on the book, they got it on the homepage right now. But at a future point, it will be on the homepage, I'm sure. And if you do a search, you can call up the page that talks about the book, and then it will link to the photo gallery. Or if you just go there and do a search on gallery, it'll come up. But there's 40 photos on that gallery that most of them, almost all of them, we did not include in the book. And they just offer these wonderful glimpses into the case. Like, for instance, photos of some of the 5 women who lost their lives, and even a couple survivors, and just a lot of crime scene photos. Not just Detroit. We got some really good photos from the crime scene in Detroit, the railroad track scene that we're talking about when Gerry mentioned the body dump, 3 women found on the same day at the railroad tracks at Military and John Cronk in southwest Detroit. Great photos from that investigation that day. But also Dearborn Heights. Wendy Jordan was discovered in the Rouge River in Dearborn Heights. And Dearborn Heights, because they don't get too many serial killers, they strenuously investigated Wendy Jordan's murder, and they locked right onto Armstrong because he was suspicious from the beginning, from the night of the discovery. And so they locked onto him and just dogged him for months afterwards while they were waiting for DNA results. And so they provided a wealth of photos. So you'll find those on the photo gallery. there were even, talking about letting things percolate, like contacting someone and let them percolate. I think about Rose Felt and her brother Scott. Rose Felt was one of the 3 women found at the railroad tracks. And I had completed my research and I had everything all done and ready to go. And I hear from Scott Felt, hey, okay, I got your message. Yeah, I'll talk to you about Rose. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so sometimes you get late breaking stuff that barely makes it in the door. Thank you, Lord, for that, because it was so wonderful to talk to Scott and just to listen to how much Rose meant to him. And so there are just so many precious stories there that you really, really want to include. But yeah, there are other bits that did not make it into the book. A couple things I can think of in particular, really not for space constraints, but just because they were more hearsay, that a couple of the interviewees said items that could not be substantiated and are very inflammatory. So those did not make it into the book. We just tried to err on the side of caution. And because we don't know, somebody's saying something 20 years later, we don't know. And sometimes memories fade or memories change and all of that. But yeah, I would say that those are the only things that really didn't make it in. Thankfully, most stuff did.
That's great. I want to commend you for having that restraint, because in true crime, there's a lot of wonderful people and podcasts and programs. But there's like that dark side of true crime where all the speculation is just thrown out there and things that aren't substantiated and hearsay with no confirmation. People are running to have this insight and they're going to personally break the case. And it's like, wait, no. You have to be ethical about this. You have to be ethical. You have to be accurate. Don't put it out there if you don't know it's true.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. Yeah, we do tend toward the sensationalism, my brethren, in the journalism field. Of course, journalism is not what it was 20 years ago, even not what it was when I was in journalism school. I struggle to find real journalists nowadays in the method that I was taught back in journalism school in the late 80s, early 90s when I first started working in newspapers. It's a whole different world out there, and it is so scary because, yeah, it's all about shock. It's all about scooping, and the online, the internet has really changed the face of journalism. And again, it's like, are there real journalists left? I'm kind of surprised when I see them these days, and that's very unfortunate.
I have to agree. I remember, what's the old film? All the President's Men.
Ah, yeah.
Well, and they're going and investigating Watergate for the younger murder bookies. And Watergate's going to cause President Nixon to resign. And they're trying to put this into the paper. And the editor's like, no, what's one source? You need confirmation. And they wouldn't let them do it. And today, it would be everywhere.
Yep.
Yeah. And unfortunately, people who really don't know what they're doing post things all over the place. And sometimes it goes viral and has traction and people think it's the truth. And it may very well not be.
And it's that craving for going viral. It's that need to go viral. I want something to go viral. So I know that's a prime motivator for that kind of thing. Really, really unfortunate.
Well, that was another reason that I wanted to speak with you, is that did confirm everything. I want to reward that. I want to let people to know that you're not just wildly speculating. But at the same time, I think this is such a strength. You present differing views and you let us decide what we think. You're not coming to the conclusion and saying, and this is, no, you're presenting this and you're presenting this. And then I get to use my critical thinking skills and figure out in the whole picture what makes sense and what I think happened based on factual information.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was definitely on my mind. To me, I wanted to gather as much as I could. I wanted to put it in a bag and present it to the reader, and they can take out what they want to take out, what they find interesting. Definitely, I want the reader to draw their own conclusion because there is so much gray area in the life of this killer. it's difficult to figure out where this all came from and what his motivations were. But I think people can form their own ideas and opinions, and I would rather they do that instead of me forcing it on them.
Well, that's the beauty of the debate and the discussion, that once you've read this, it's like, wow, so does this get weighted more, or these aspects? And like you said, he's so contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
Nicest guy, quiet and reserved, great sense of humor, strangling women.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It was masterful. Now that you hear about serial killers a lot, that they're masterful at hiding that dark side. Mm-hmm. And he was good at it. He was really good at it.
Yep, he really was living a double life. I think his wife got blindsided. I don't think that anybody who was close to him had any inkling this was going on. I think he was totally living two different lives. One life when he got out of work and hopped in his Jeep and went prowling on Michigan Avenue, that was a different person than the one who went home that night. So yes, very interesting from a psychological perspective.
You hear that in the Long Island serial killer case, Rex Heuermann is going to be on trial at some point. So he's the alleged Long Island serial killer. I think his family was completely blindsided. I know Carrie Rawson is Dennis Rader's daughter, and that poor woman is still dealing with PTSD.
I love her book. I just read her book. Thank you, Gerry. Gerry lent it to me. Gerry read her book too. And oh my goodness. I have always loved Carrie's story because the first thing I heard about Carrie's story, and I don't know if I think I saw this on one of the true crime specials on the case, was the idea of forgiveness, the element of forgiveness. The fact that, yeah, you get blindsided by this family member who was living this double life. Oh my gosh, my dad actually was a murderer all those years that I was growing up, and we were going on family trips and we were hiking the Grand Canyon and whatever else. He was a serial murderer, and he was the one they were talking about in the newspapers. I mean, I can't even imagine what that was like. But in all of that, she found forgiveness, and the power of forgiveness is a very strong theme in her book too, and in her story. But yeah, I was really impacted by her book. Wonderful book. I highly recommend it.
Oh, I've got a book for you then. It's called Frozen in Fear. It is by Jane Carson Sandler. I covered the book, so you can just listen to it on the podcast.
Yes, I will. Okay.
But she was the fifth victim of the Golden State Killer. She was the fifth rape victim. And in her book, she talks about carrying this backpack of anger and resentment. And she just had to forgive him and decide to let it go. And it certainly isn't for him, but it was for her.
Yes.
She's so eloquent in her explanation. She has become a dear, dear friend of mine. And we roomed together at CrimeCon too. It was so much fun. And I said to her, I said, yours is such an upbeat story. And she goes, I was raped by a serial murderer. How's that an upbeat story? I said, because it's not about the one day. Mm-hmm. It's about what you did with your life afterwards.
Exactly. Just like the old adage, life is a small percentage what happens to us and a much larger percentage how we react to it. So yes, that is a wonderful testimonial. Oh my goodness. Yes, I'm definitely going to listen to that.
Definitely. She's just such a remarkable woman. Established rape centers for women. Just all kinds of phenomenal outcome. And had definitely had her struggles as she was making her way through this.
Yeah, and like you say, it is really for you. You're not so much doing that person a favor when you're forgiving them. You're healing your heart, and you're really doing it for yourself. So, yeah, that powerful message. Wow. Yeah, and as far as the Armstrong case, that forgiveness idea is interesting because I will tell you, when he was sentenced for the first trial was Wendy Jordan, the second trial was Kelly Hood. When he was convicted in the Wendy Jordan trial, convicted of killing Wendy, there were victim impact statements. There were Wendy's sisters who spoke very, very strongly, very powerfully. And when it came Armstrong's time to speak, and I will say there was not a forgiveness aspect. There was definitely a condemnation aspect of the victim impact statements. But when it came Armstrong's turn to speak, he did not apologize. He didn't reference the crimes. He complained about how his lawyer had represented him. And that was really sad. And even with all of that, I really tend to hope years later, just from knowing him a little bit, talking with him as I have a couple times, I do hope that he will experience forgiveness with his family members. I'm sure he has with his mom and his stepdad. They visit him all the time. And, there's that. But he has other family members that he has not seen since he was arrested. And I really pray for him that he would experience that, because we're all human beings. And that's what life is about, I think, is healing and moving forward. So who knows what will happen?
I think there has to be some owning it.
Oh, definitely.
People to get there.
Yep, you're right.
I did want to ask you something, though.
Mm-hmm.
He's crying a lot. He does express some remorse.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe it?
That is a big part of the crazy picture of this. That is a big part of the contradiction, is that you look at these confessions that he made to Detroit police after Gerry's crew arrested him in April 2000. And the arresting or the interrogating officers first got him to admit and then start flowing with these confessions, one right after another, boom, 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 and confessions to murders when he was serving in the Navy in the 1990s included, like all this other stuff that they didn't even think they would ever hear. Okay, wow, other murders in the 1990s? This is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So he's freely confessing, and he is showing a lot of remorse. He's even taking, when he's signing his confessions, he signs his name, and then sometimes he includes a little handwritten note. I'm sorry for all that has happened. I hope that the family can forgive me. He actually does say stuff like that on his confessions. Now, that was when he was arrested, and he was crying. And there was no camera in his face. There was no media reporting all of this. That was just something he was doing uncoerced. So you take that fact and you contrast it with months or a year or so later when he's on trial, and all of a sudden he's got a lawyer who's defending him and saying that he didn't commit these murders, like these confessions never happened. And so how do you reconcile those things? You've got a truly repentant seeming person who is hoping for forgiveness, and then you've got somebody who's claiming that he's not guilty later when he's being tried. So do you believe it? Do you believe the remorse? I don't know. Maybe hope springs eternal. Maybe I'm an optimist and I want to believe that he honestly was remorseful, and that today, years later, since he's been sitting in a cell thinking about it more than 20 years, that he honestly is remorseful. I would like to think that, even though he won't talk about it. But really, we just don't know.
Gerry, no one can see you, but you're shaking your head going,
oh, I know. He takes a much different view. Maybe if I'm the optimist, I don't know, Gerry, are you in the other direction?
Well, think about everything. You and I have both read an awful lot about serial killers and serial criminals in general. And what's the one thing that we seem to stumble across all the time? They're all master manipulators. And I'm not even sure it was in the book. Billy Ray, you can refresh my memory if it was. Police headquarters is located directly across the street from Detroit Recorder's Court, is what we call it. It's the district court for the city of Detroit. And that's where he would be walked to go for his court appearances. And there's always the thing they talk about on TV, the perp walk. And we had no other choice. It was directly across the street. You're not going to drive him across the street. So the first time that he was walked across the street from the lockup in headquarters to Recorder's Court, he realized that there was going to be a lot of fuss. And the detectives that were assigned to escort him, they said, yeah, there is. And, it's the nature of the crimes you're accused of that you confess to. And, we don't get a whole lot of serial killers, even in the city of Detroit. We're known for a lot of things, and most of it's violent crime. We hadn't had a serial killer in almost 10 years prior to Eric. And The thing that he asked for at the time, even then, he's performing this manipulation. He wanted to know if he could have a teddy bear to carry with him when he walked in front of the cameras. And we all looked at each other and went, I don't think so. I mean, the little notes, the I'm sorry's that Billy Ray mentions when he signs his confessions and everything, I'm not saying that was a manipulative move. I'm saying I don't believe that he was sorry any more than I believe he needed a teddy bear to walk across the street in front of the TV cameras. I think he was characteristic of most serial killers. He's a manipulator. This also explains in my mind why everybody that we talked to that knew him described him as, just the sweetest guy in the world. And, that's how the title of the book came up, Baby Doll Killer. He was referred to as Baby Doll in the Navy, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, he was just such a sweet guy and so nonviolent. No one could ever imagine that he would be a serial killer. And that, in my mind, that's consistent with everything that I've read about other serial killers and about the psychological profile of that kind of criminal mentality is that they manipulate. That's how they are so successful in finding and capturing their victims to begin with, and evading capture after they've committed their crimes. You mentioned Dennis Rader. He was on city council or something like that. He was a Boy Scout leader in his normal life while he was out murdering people in his secret serial killer life. I mean, if that doesn't take manipulation and the ability to convince people that you're not only harmless, but a civic-minded, good citizen, I don't know what does.
Mm-hmm.
I discount any of this. Maybe he really was sincere, and maybe he was really, really sorry for what he did. That's all crap in my mind. I'm sorry.
Well, Gerry, I will say, in all fairness, I do realize that when you're I don't know this perspective, but when you're a person who's been arrested for murder and you're making confessions to all of these killings and you're signing your confessions, you know that those confessions are going to make their way into court. So I do totally acknowledge that. Like, if you put a little note in there, I'm sorry, can the family please forgive me? You are picturing that probably in your mind, like that's going to be used against you. That's going to be used in court. So yeah, I do understand that aspect. It's just so difficult to say what really is going on in the mind of a serial killer.
Oh, well, that's why I wanted to ask, because, I do have the cop and the journalist, so and got two very different perspectives on it. But Dennis Rader was president of his church. And sneaky, and he left one of the Boy Scout jamborees that they were on and went and killed a woman.
Yes, he had an alibi, but he left and came back. Yes, that is an astounding part of that case. I was really struck by that story too. And didn't he have like a kid
his son?
One of the kids. Yeah, his son was part of the troop. Like, he didn't realize Dad just left to go kill somebody. Oh my gosh.
When they say they're manipulators and they think long term, I have to think he was very, very remorseful that he got caught.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have to wonder, given some of his behavior too, that he didn't kind of expose himself. That, you weren't really aware there was a serial killer active. Homicides happen. And he kind of pushes things so that you are. There is a certain notoriety. I don't want you to know about what I'm doing, but I want you to know I'm out there.
Oh, he definitely wanted attention. There was like a touch of narcissism, maybe more than a touch of narcissism with Rader, I think, because he wanted to be in the papers when they weren't talking about him. He wanted to be back in the papers. And even Carrie talks about this a little bit in her book, that after he was incarcerated and he's, maybe even leading up to trial or even after the trial, he's just concerned about himself. He's concerned about what she's sending him for his time behind bars. Did you get me this or did you get me that? I mean, he's concerned about himself. It's like he was totally clueless as to how all of this was affecting her. I mean, wow.
Didn't care whatsoever.
I guess the The $1 million question of why Armstrong killed is a really strong one and is always fascinating to me from a psychological perspective. But I do start out the book with the story of each of the 5 women who lost their lives and then the stories of 2 of the survivors that I spoke with. So I hope that will resonate, because to me, the story was just as much about why were these females even out there on the streets?
Yeah.
That really struck a chord with me. I wanted to figure that out too. I mean, in addition to the $1 million question, I wanted to know what went wrong in these lives that could happen to any of us. And addiction, it kept coming back to addiction for me. And so that's one of my, I guess, soapbox items is the nature of addiction and how prevalent it is in this country and how we just don't do enough about it. Those are my thoughts, and then I'll hand it over to Gerry.
There's just so much about this case that kept it, in the forefront of my mind all of these years. The gravity of the situation, the extent of the investigation. I mean, we were working with NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. We had one of their agents assigned into our office to help us track down the Nimitz, all of its ports, every place I put into port, a lot of things that would typically be considered secret from the general public, we had to have access to, and that was provided by an NCIS agent being assigned into our unit for a period of time during the investigation. That was my first interaction with those guys, and I was highly impressed with the professionalism and the extent to which they were able to answer a lot of unanswered questions we never would have gotten answers to. I mean, they had to incorporate work from the U.S. State Department in order to interact with these foreign countries' law enforcement agencies to see whether or not they would assist in the prosecution or the investigation, substantiating his confessions of having murdered overseas in various other countries. So the whole case itself was just so dynamic, fast-moving, exciting. I mean, even a major city cop, how often do you think that you would have an opportunity in your career to interact with foreign countries, NCIS, the FBI, you name it, and get involved in an investigation that actually spanned the globe, investigating a serial killer that murdered all over the world?
Yeah.
And used the U.S. Armed Forces as the way to escape. It's almost like the perfect crime. I don't know. That was all what went into my mind when I made the decision early on in the process that this needed to be preserved and it needed to be talked about. The other aspect, I think it's on our website, Billy Ray mentions this thing was, you had said, Jill, early on in the interview that you hadn't heard of this guy or this case. And a lot of people haven't when they first read the book. Well, who is this? And then if they're local, they go, oh yeah, it seems I remember something about that, but it happened so quickly from discovery of the body until arrest of the perpetrator that it kind of faded into memories. But all in all, there were 2 major TV series in the early 2000s that actually replicated the case. One almost word for word, to the extent that the actor they got was a spitting image of John Eric Armstrong. Another one, they modified it slightly as to the source of the original information about murders. They said they got it from Interpol rather than, the city of Detroit. But it was still the same case. And it was a little bit more famous than a lot of people realize until it's pointed out to them that this thing really, really struck a chord with a lot of people all over the world.
Oh, I did not know that. I'm just so glad you preserved that file, because that had to be just a treasure trove.
I have others. I keep telling Billy Ray. But
I need a few more hours in the day. Yeah. Detroit has a lot of interesting cases. Oh, my goodness. And so many of the cops that I talked to, the police from Detroit that I interviewed for this book, they all seem to want to write their own book because they all got stories to tell. They'd be like, oh, man, can I tell you some stories from Detroit? So Detroit is just full of crazy stuff like that.
Can you tell me about your next project?
Yes, actually, and it's completed and in the works and being released hopefully after the first of the year in 2025. The second book in the Murders in the Motor City series from Wild Blue Press. I researched the case of Benjamin Atkins, who is probably the other big serial killer that people remember from Detroit, the other one that made national headlines. Benjamin Atkins killed people in 1991 and 1992, so a few years earlier than Armstrong, and he hunted on Woodward Avenue as opposed to Armstrong's hunting ground of Michigan Avenue. And he is an interesting case. Oh my goodness. I was so fascinated from a psychological perspective by the story of Atkins. I'll just throw one little aspect out there. After he was arrested, he claimed to hear voices.
Oh boy.
And so that adds a whole different element. He was assessed by several different psychologists and psychiatrists in between the time of his arrest and his trial to try to assess, what's going on with this person. And so he is a very interesting person with an interesting background, a very unfortunate background. And so that's the next story that will be told in this series.
You'll have to come back.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you.
I think we'll have a wonderful discussion on that one too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both for coming on. I appreciate it so much. I am so happy to be able to help promote your book and let people know it's out there.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And I will let you know when the episode comes out.
That's great. I look forward to hearing it. Yeah, and thank you again for the reviews. We love any of that assistance.
Yes, absolutely. Bye-bye now. Weren't they great murder bookies? Well, I cannot thank B.R. Bates and Gerry Cliff for joining me today. I hope you are as intrigued by this book as I am. Such a different kind of serial killer from one that I've studied. But for now, that wraps up episode 116. And in 2 weeks, I will begin my new trilogy, 16 Minutes. Was the death of baby Matthew an accident or murder? By Diane Marger Moore. On March 6, 1993, a fire broke out in a nursery in Indianapolis, Indiana. 16 minutes later, firefighters extinguished the blaze, revealing a room so severely burned that everything was unrecognizable. Firefighters were then told to look for a newborn baby boy. Only 2 people were at home when the fire erupted, and that would be Matthew's parents. Fire investigators deemed the incident suspicious, and while an initial prosecutor was uninterested in pursuing the case, the new arson prosecutor, Diane Marger Moore, our author, was determined to seek justice for baby Matthew Wise. Can't wait to tell you about this. Some of you have asked how you can help. Well, introduce your family and friends to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. Now you can leave comments on Spotify, so that would be really nice if you would do that. And thank you for being with me on our journey together into the stories, the updates, and the analysis of the best true crime books there are out there. It is a joy to be doing this. You can email me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or find me on X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. See you in 2 weeks. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.